Hi, so this is an abbreviated version of what we presented on our Generation 5 Back to School Night for you. I'm Tom Hennis. I'll be your narrator for this journey. As with always, I won't talk about necessarily everything on the slide, but I'll try to give you a brief overview of what the main points are, and you can always, again, contact us with follow-up questions as needed. On this slide, you'll see this is our cohort for this year, Generation 5. There have been some changes of the picture taken in the spring. We have 29 students this year. We have 4 seniors and 25 juniors as we go through it. And you'll see our new Evolutions Gen 5 logo in the bottom left. So we went through introductions. We talked about our mission, some similarities and differences between what you're used to seeing in school and what we present as a program. We'll preview the year for you. We'll talk about our schedule, our approach to feedback, assessment, and grading, some general expectations and accountability we have for students, and some ways for you to help out. So those are kind of the different chapters of this video. Introductions. So as I said, I'm Mr. Hennis, Tom Hennis. I'm the English teacher in the program and the coordinator. We have Brian Corey, who is the art teacher in the program, Miss Mindy Hogue, who's a science teacher and new to the team this year, representing social studies, is Mrs. Crystal Bartels. We also do have an administrator connected to the program. It's Mr. Drew Kelton. So if there's some larger questions about the program and how we're functioning, he's the one to kind of go to from the administrative point of view. So just talking about our mission, this is from our program of studies, and it's a lot of, again, text on the screen, and I encourage you to read it through. But what we're basically asking our students to do, and what we believe in as a program, is how do we create a more student-centered version of education, where we're de-siloing kind of some of the stuff that's going on and how they approached before, and seeing how learning is all together and it's part of the human experience. So to do this, we're an interdisciplinary program. We will, again, mix together art, English, science, and social studies. We don't have a lot of distinct classes in those. There are times that we do. We look like a traditional school. There are times that there will be some co-teaching involved, or we'll mix together different activities to pull from the different disciplines. We also really encourage a collaborative approach to learning as well as teaching, so getting students to learn from each other, working in small groups. We practice a lot of intentional collaboration where they're learning how to do these things. We just don't throw them in and say, okay, you're on a team, now do it. We check in with them how they're setting up their teams, their norms, how they're interacting with some feedback loops. And we believe in experiential or project-based learning through doing, moving outside of the school building, going into the community to get inspired by our learning, but also bring our learning into the community to give back to them and have the work that we do here be meaningful to others outside of just it was a task that we did through that. Those are the main kind of things that we are grappling with. We do it by, again, forming a community within the school, so getting to know each other and who's in the program, what our strengths and weaknesses are, how we can support each other, how we can challenge each other. And so getting students to think of not just kind of their individual approach to learning, but how are they learning with other folks. And again, that's something that's different from what they may be used to in a classroom, just being able to come in and be individual students. Now we're a collective body because we can do more together. Some other similarities and differences. So for this slide, it's really just to try to think about like what are you used to versus what do we do? How is it, again, similar and it meets all the same WHS standards, but where do we have some variations? So we do meet within school hours. So we're a program that typically is meeting between 8:35 and 2:30. Within there, we have 4 blocks that students are with us. There are times that we do leave a little bit earlier in Block 1, or Block A now. There are times that we have some evening events or weekend events, and we let students know ahead of time, but for the most part, again, our program takes place during the school hours. One of the differences is that when we have blocks together, though, we don't have to separate them out into 59-minute classes, right? So if we have 3 hours of time, within the program, we'll schedule how we're going to use that 3 hours of time we'll give breaks. But it might be we're going to do something together for 2 hours, and then we're going to take a 15-minute break. We're going to do something for 20 minutes, and then you're going to transition to another activity and do a 80-minute activity. So we control the schedule within the program time. For accountability, we follow all the WHS student handbook policies. So if it's something that wouldn't be allowed in a regular classroom, we wouldn't allow it either. This goes for We have attendance, we'll talk about a little bit later, but behavioral expectations and academic responsibility in terms of honesty, integrity, and work. We also have another layer of policies that we kind of go in. We're out of the building a lot, so we expect our students to represent both the high school and the program when they're out in the field doing field work. And again, violation of some of those fieldwork norms means that they will be right back here and not be able to do some of the experiential components. We also have norms within the program. They're in the syllabus for you. With those norms, they're more of when a norm gets transgressed upon, we talk about it. We bring it to either small groups of students or we bring it to the larger program to say, is this how we want to be interacting and treating each other within the program? And we also have exit counseling. So we're an opt-in program. If there are things that are not working for students or the program, we have a process to kind of say, is this the right fit for the student at this time? Is this where they're going to learn best as they go into? And students, again, have left the program before for a variety of reasons. So just because you're here doesn't mean you have to be here, right? So we're trying to figure out what works best for everybody. For curriculum, you might be used to just, again, what book are you reading, what's the chapter you're on in that science textbook, what art project are you working on, what moment of history you're in. That's kind of core curriculum and academic. We still have, again, core content. We also just kind of centered around our evolutions learning outcomes, which is attached on our website, and also we hand it out on the night, and if you didn't get a copy, we can make sure you get a copy. We also, again, approach units with thematic topics and projects. So at times, like, it's not quite a linear progression through social studies or history or through, biology and science. It's taking one topic and trying to dive a little bit deep. And again, we blend together the disciplines, so it's not necessarily siloed out. We also go into kind of SEL and how do students get to know about themselves and how to manage their own learning, how are they managing relationships with others, so that's part of our curriculum as well. In terms of what you're used to with homework, we do require work outside of the program. It's not just a come to school, do work, and be done. We call it prep work instead because usually it's what do you need to do to make progress to be prepared for tomorrow and engage tomorrow. And we have accountability for that prep work. One of the differences is that, in prior years, it might be each class had their own half hour, 40 minutes of work. You add those together. It's a good chunk of time each night, and it's in variety of, like, I need to put my math hat on, and then put my science hat on, and I need to put my English hat on. Our prep work is typically all moving in the same direction, so because we're covering a thematic topic or project, it's all connected to each other, and we try to be very mindful about only trying to expect between an hour and a half of prep work per night. This allows students to breathe a little bit, but they, again, with that, I want to say with that little, they really need it for the next day. If they don't have, they don't do it, they come in and they feel lost and disjointed and are playing catch up, and it might have an effect not only on them and their accountability, but if they're working in a team or working in larger groups, like their ability to contribute. And so it's really valuing, again, that time to get prepared. We do have assessment. We're going to cover this a little bit later on. And we have grades. We just are more standards-based and growth mindset, which allows us to be holistic and student-centered as we go. We'll talk about that later on. And advisory. So typically, every student has an advisory within WHS. We have small advisories within the program of 7 to 8 students that meet somewhat regularly during the regular advisory block. Usually there's 3 or 4 days that we'll meet in our advisory, but then we also try to add another layer of kind of helping to do some one-on-one counseling, conferences with students, just to check in with them, how they're doing within the program, and kind of guide them through this new place of learning. So it's kind of small group and then trying to do some one-on-one connections. So what's our year going to look like this year? So every year, this is our 5th year, our curriculum changes a little bit based off of what's available and who's on the team, which teachers are on the team, what have we learned from previous years that we want to integrate into the next year. So in our first semester, we've already been through our first 2-week kind of introduction to evolution sprint, which is just establishing all the structures, routines, and expectations. In the recording of this video, we're actually on day 2 of unit, which is looking at self-identity, and how do we kind of look at the different disciplines to combine them together to create one product. And in the fall, there'll be 2 units. Students will get both. We'll split the program in 2 cohorts, and so half of them will do marginalized voices first, the other half will do environmental stewardship, and then they swap, right? And so they'll have exposure to both as they go through. That leads us to kind of the midstone, which is kind of in the bridge point of semester 2. This is their opportunity to kind of like learn how to do independent learning and think about what they want to learn and how they want to show that learning. And we walk them through that process to help build their independent learning skills. In the spring, we are going to have 2 more units, or actually have 4 units, that students will be able to pick from. They'll pick 2. They have to do 1 social science and English. They have to do 1 art and social studies. But they'll get to pick which ones they want to do as they go through it. We haven't quite defined what those are. We're still working through some of our curriculum development, so as soon as we know, we'll let you know. The goal in the second half of the year is that we're building more of their self-reliance, independent skills while still getting a lot of the content in. So we try to release students to show us what they can do in the second half of the year, which leads to capstone. Very similar to midstone, to being a student-driven unit. With this, we're really going to see at the end of the year what can they put together, which includes kind of a collaborative component. For our juniors, after capstone, we have a junior transition. We talk about and lead them through what they're going to have to do for their senior year, and ultimately they have to complete a final conference where they, quote unquote, defend their year. They have to show evidence of where they gained and grew in the year, what they're still working on, and kind of a larger reflexive piece. And we'll talk more about that later, but we end with that piece. On a day-to-day schedule, again, we just have a visual here. So Evo runs during tan, red, blue, and purple blocks. You'll notice students many times are in their other classes, so they take lunch with WHS. On some days when they're with Evo, they take first lunch. They have up to 3 classes they can take outside of the program. So those are orange, yellow, and green block. Students might opt for a free. This is where they're working with their guidance counselor as they go through it. And then there's some special blocks within our program that we kind of execute some program components. I'll talk about that in the next slide. And we'll build in as we go in throughout the year opportunities to go visit the old advisories so that they can still maintain those connections they have. But you'll notice again, we start at 8:30, we end at 2:30. It's just the time we use within the day. But that's kind of the flow of what you'll see students going through. Students get the schedule for the week towards the beginning of the week, and we set it out at the beginning of units of what that next whole unit looks like in the calendar. If we break it down to specific days, this is just 2 examples from the beginning of this year where we start the day with a morning convo. This is 10 to 15 minutes where we're just kind of all getting in, we're settling in, we're looking at what are our main questions of the day, what's our schedule, joys, concerns, questions the students have, are there any announcements, and there's just kind of setting the tone for the day. Then we go through, we might do, on Thursday the 5th, we had an Evo block, so we were meeting with committees, we were doing, those sort of seminar work, we'll talk about that in a second. And then they go to their other classes, they come back, and then we, we break it down, they got introduced to public speaking, then they had some time to practice, then we had a debrief, right? So, again, less 59 minutes, a little bit more, what are you doing for this activity, etc. If you look at the Wednesday 9/11 schedule, very similar. We start with that morning convo. They have time to work on a project. They go to some other classes. They come back and work on a project. We do some debriefing towards the end of the day. And then we did another set piece at the end where we kind of talked about portfolio and assessment as we went through. So just to give you, again, a thought of what the days look like. This is what they see during morning convo in terms of what music is kind of guiding our day, what are some of their startup tasks, what are their essential questions, what's their schedule. Sometimes we'll have quotes of, that kind of connect and get them to spark some thinking as they go through. For E-Block, or Evo Block, so as mentioned, we run some different programmatic components. So alongside all the other curriculum, projects, etc., students are going to serve on 3 different committees throughout the year. So there's governing committee, which is in charge of kind of the internal workings of the program. They run the town hall. If their students want to suggest changes to the program, they run it through the governing committee. There's public relations. So that's managing our Instagram account, our website, a little bit with Mr. Corey, student videos, student kind of anything that's going to go to the public that's about our program. And then we have a Body and Mind committee this year. So this is run by Ms. Kathy Brophy and Dr. Adam DiLiberto. So they're 2 teachers at WHS. And it's coming in and how students kind of take care of themselves through some mindfulness, but also learn to work with others in a much more flexible way, which is through dancing. And so students will go through and be with one of these committees for 7 sessions, and then they'll rotate as a whole group to then another committee, and by the end of the year, they'll hit all 3. These are treated as classes. These are not like timeouts from learning. It's really about how do we give ownership of the program over to the students. So there might be expectations, prep work, assessment as they go through. So these aren't times to just be like, eh. Student committee block is day 4, block B. For town hall, this is once per cycle where students lead the discussion. So governing committee will set up the room, they'll set the agenda topics, they will run it, teachers have to raise their hand to participate, and they're the one managing what they want to talk about. So it's like an actual town hall, but student run. It gives them, again, a place to kind of practice those democratic skills, to interact with each other civilly, and also talk about what's important to them, where they're not waiting for a teacher to give them, it needs to be this, this, or this. They get to dictate, what is they're going to talk about and how they want to talk about it. Genius Hour. Town halls. Day 1, what is that? Block, I want to say E of the day. Genius Hour. So this is day 1, block F. So Genius Hour is another special time that we're integrating in the program. It's new this year. So since Midstone and Capstone are student-directed, we found that we actually need to give them more lead time to think about a topic, brainstorm it, decide on it, and do the initial research before we get to the actual Midstone unit. So this is just a way to kind of like for students to make progress before they get to the big independence. So we can break down big tasks into smaller tasks, we can give them feedback, and know that they necessarily haven't had to take this level of independence in their learning before, so giving them the structure and support as we go. Portfolio block. So this is day 7, block B. So we, as opposed to having, and then we'll talk about this in another few slides, I keep saying that, as opposed to saying sit down and take this quiz, take this test, write this paper to show what you know, we give this back to students, and we have our learning outcomes, and we target them in any given cycle, and we say, okay, if these are the 5, 6, 7 learning outcomes we're focused on this cycle, the portfolio block is time for them to show up and basically pull from what they've done and submit it as actual evidence for assessment, where they are able to submit a piece of work. Maybe it's an image out of their journal or something they did collaboratively on a board. Maybe it's an assignment they wrote up already. Maybe it's a video of them presenting something or sharing their knowledge, whatever it may be, that piece of tangible evidence. And then they would also reflect of like, how does that meet the learning outcome that they attached it to? And so it's a little bit of plug and play in terms of if we say this is the learning outcome for blank, they submit evidence to say, I think it meets that, and then they're able to kind of give the reflection of here's why it meets that. And so the portfolio block is, again, this dedicated time for them to submit that evidence and reflection as they go, so they can ask clarifying questions and they can get support as they're doing it. Which leads to feedback, assessment, and grading. So there's a philosophical component to this, and then there's a very practical component to this. So philosophically, again, we're really trying to make the connection between student growth and assessment by thinking about proficiency, product, and process and product. So we're not just going to the end and saying, show me what you got at the end, I'm just going to assess that on these skills. We want to understand, very specific skills within the program. We want to know how they went about it along the way. And we do pay attention to final product, but it's not necessarily the only thing we look at. Also, we're interdisciplinary by nature. So we're not going to necessarily separate things out into how much is an art, how much of that project is art versus English versus science versus social studies. So students will get 1 grade for all the 4 evolutions courses. The 5th course, evolutions, is in there. It's just, for this year, it's a non-credit grade. With this, all courses are at honors level. We're asking students to, again, redefine their approach to education in terms of not just doing what the teacher asks, but also how do they show self-motivation? How are they working with others? How are they challenging when it's open-ended? And so because we're really asking for that, it's why it gets honors credit. For individual courses, we do have some flexibility to honor student achievement if they really, again, show that they are going above and beyond in a particular discipline, is it art, English, science, social studies, etc., then they can earn and be rewarded with that sort of half grade up, right? Or if they are totally avoidant of one of these disciplines and are not necessarily engaging with art, English, science, or social studies on any tangible level, the teacher can, again, reflect on that and say, okay, they haven't necessarily earned this credit, and so they move the grade half grade down. With this, Evolution is also, we're part of the semester pilot here at WHS. What this basically means, it doesn't totally apply to us, um, but it's part of the pilot. So we don't calculate grades numerically by term. So it's not in term one you earned this, C. In term two you earned an A, and we average those together, and that means you get a B. We are a growth mindset, so all of the term grades and semester grade are more just like checkpoints along the way or signposts of like where are you at right now. And by the end of the year, it's giving students the flexibility to show us that they've gained proficiency in all those skills and learning outcomes that we have through the course of the year. That to say, if a student hasn't necessarily engaged in some of these learning outcomes in the first part of the year, they're not going to have the practice necessary to achieve meeting standard later on in the year. So it's not, I'm going to do nothing until the end and then I'll show them that I can do these things. They really need the targeted practice throughout the year in order to get to that place at the very end. But just to say, when we think of what you're going to see in Power School, which we talk about, and what's going to happen at progress report time and term time, it's going to look a little bit differently, and there's going to be a letter attached with that as well when we send this out. So, let me go back here. Sorry. So the process that we go through to kind of get to these outcomes. So whenever we have a unit and we start the unit, students will get a copy of our learning outcomes that we're going to be assessing throughout this unit, so the EVO rubric. We give them time to look at it. It's on Canvas. They'll get a paper copy, and they'll ask clarifying questions like, well, how am I going to show this? How am I going to show that? So we give them that space. Then as teachers, we lead them through formative assessments, mini project activities that are going to introduce and model the skills needed, and they'll have time to practice those skills. As I mentioned during the portfolio time, they're going to compile the sort of evidence of their learning outcomes and their growth over time, and they're going to submit it to us. At which point we'll be able to give them kind of like peer, or they can seek out peer feedback, and we'll give them teacher feedback on what they submitted for evidence, so they know how were they doing well, what do they still work on before we kind of get to the end. At the end of the unit, they will go back and kind of look at, here's what I submitted, here is what the feedback was, here's how I applied it. They will self-assess them. They'll perform a self-assessment about how they think they did on our learning outcomes. And with that, so now we'll have a bank of evidence, reflective pieces, feedback, a self-assessment, and then the student will sit down with one of their teachers and have it ends up being a 25-minute conference where they talk about what happened in this unit. What were the strengths? What were the students doing really well? What did they miss on? What do they still need to work on? And kind of talk about what we're seeing to build that sort of consensus of what is the growth, what are the needs. After that conversation, when I say conversation, like it's something, the conferences are something that students actually have to like prepare for, because they need to come in knowing what they want to talk about and have that meta reflective hat on where they can say, I know I need to work on this. I know I did well on that. Are you seeing the same thing? And the teacher will be like, yes, I'm seeing the same thing here. I disagree here. Here's why. Let's talk about that. But students will receive then a final rubric with a final write-up of feedback. So kind of we had the conversation. Now here's the summative version. And we'll post a version of that in Power School. Typically, it will be kind of attached with a letter grade. A lot of the feedback we give is through Canvas. There might be some top-level summative comments in Power School. After we, again, post that final rubric with final feedback, and we have a version of Power School, students then also have to go back and look at the rubric feedback and some narrative feedback we gave them in Canvas, and they have to summarize what feedback they got, and they end up writing an email to parents and teachers that kind of closes the loop on where they know that they're at and where we know that they're at as teachers and where you know where they're at as parents. If they're unsatisfied with that final feedback or rubric, they can advocate for themselves, go back to the teacher and say, I know I either have different evidence I want to show you, or I know I can do that better. I'm willing to make a revision and resubmit. Typically, there is a time window on that where we give them about a week after they get the final summative feedback where they can say, do I want to go back and redo work? For some skills, they really want to. For other ones, they know in the future I can do that better. I'm going to have the opportunities to show I can do that better going forward. So it's, again, a little bit more student directed in terms of how they want to revise or resubmit work. Citizenship. So this is a little bit different of an animal. Because it's great when we think we have these learning outcomes that are tracking different skills in different units, but it doesn't necessarily tell us, how is the student engaging on a regular basis. So this is where we have our citizenship rubric and our citizenship learning outcomes. So once per cycle, and it will show up either on a day 7 or day 1 that they'll get in Canvas posted this rubric that tracks how are they doing on attendance within the program. Are they completing their daily prep work? When they show up to school, are they prepared to engage? As in, do they just have the pen, pencil? Do they have their journal? Do they have the computer? Do they have the text we're working with? When they're here at school and we're going through activities, are they following protocols, or do they need constant, you aren't doing what you're being asked to do sort of thing? So are they leading through that? And the last one is social responsibility, and this was probably the hardest one to qualify. But in thinking about us as a community, are they very positive members of the community where they are able to proactively follow the norms and help other people follow the norms? Are they really showing respect and cooperation with their peers and teachers as we go through it? Are they the ones helping out with equipment, moving stuff around? Are they, again, showing integrity and honesty? Are they, behaving really ethically with that? And that's, again, meeting the standard. They're that positive contribution versus, we think of neutral. It's they come in, they do their thing. Yes, they're prepared, they're on task, but they're kind of existing in this a little bit more of personal, individual realm, where it's kind of it's not my problem realm. And a growth area is really the students that are coming in and they are detracting from our learning experience and our learning community here. And so this is something, again, we track with them through citizenship. And so unlike unit stuff in PowerSchool where you'll kind of see just kind of end of unit summative feedback, to kind of balance it out, we'll do this regular citizenship so you can kind of understand when we look at grades per se and growth, is it because of issues with engagement, which is citizenship, or is it issues with the actual skills that they're struggling with? So we can kind of figure out where are the problem areas and how can we help support our kids together. So how can you track progress? So that was kind of a big philosophical, we're to practical. So the first one's going to be ask your kiddo questions, about what did they learn today, what were they working on. We use design process, so you could say what part of the design process are you in? Or if we're collaborating, ask, who did they help out or who are they working with? How are those interactions going? We really value curiosity and the idea of it's not just showing up and, the I know everything. So what questions they asked today or do they have about today? We value failure in terms of if we're not putting ourselves out there to risk failure, then we're not necessarily challenging ourselves appropriately. So, and we want to acknowledge that. We want to acknowledge it when we fail, because then we can say, okay, I didn't do that so well today. I can do better tomorrow. So you can say, how did you fail today? And similarly, how are they challenged today? Is it academically? Is it socially? Is it philosophically? But what was kind of waking them up and pushing them out of that little comfort zone? Or what was an aha moment they've had, where something just kind of clicked for them and they felt really good about, making that breakthrough. So asking them questions is going to give you a sense of again, what they're doing, how they're doing, why they're doing it as you go through. We know all people have off days and they don't want to share, and that's okay. But this is a starting point. Another one is we use Canvas a lot in the program. Again, with having 4 different teachers, 5th with our TA, Mr. Krasner, we just need that kind of common place that we can gather materials. We put a lot of instructions, steps, tasks. We do a lot of our assessment through Canvas and tracking learning mastery, and I'll show you guys that in a little bit. So with this, we really ask you to look at the Canvas page together, have them click through and show feedback, or look at assignments, look at expectations together, because students are integral. And so not just saying, give me your password, I'm going to go look at it. They're going to provide the context and the glue that's going to help it make sense. And so, yeah, look at that together. On Canvas, they might see feedback. So with this, if they submitted this writing piece here, we can go in and highlight specific parts. We can give them that feedback, right? So they can look at a very specific assignment as they go. You'll see something like this. You might see a rubric where we have the learning outcome criteria listed, which again that we've previewed with them. They have access to. They know how we're measuring it, and so they might see, okay, here's where the rubric is present or got marked. Within that, you'll notice in this one, you might see under, with the rubric, there might sometimes be comments, right? And so on that particular prep work completion, here's the comment, or in the live discussion, here's the comment. So on particular learning outcomes, there might be some feedback, or there might be some summative feedback on the overall assignment. So with these three slides or three different sections I went through, again, we try to give students different types of feedback depending on the assignment. It might be some practical, logistical about the evidence they submitted or the work they submitted, right? Which we go in, we might highlight things. It might be a quick, here's the rubric and here's where you're falling on the rubric. Or it might be, here's the rubric with some qualifying feedback to how to target growth with some summative comments. And so just getting to think about how are they looking at feedback, and how you can look at feedback with them so they understand where they have to go to the next steps. Over time, what Canvas does is it allows us to track these learning outcomes throughout the year. And so in this example, if you look at here in ingenuity, innovation, and imagination, so as we assess, you'll notice this was 2 alignments. So that means they submitted 2 pieces of evidence that then we assessed, and then it will pull up a little graph and be like, if this is meet standard up here, the first one was a little bit lower, the second one's growing. So if over the course of the year we have 6, 7, 8 alignments, then we know that there were 8 times that students could show this ingenuity, innovation, imagination, and this line would kind of keep going to let us know where did they end up and how did they get there. And so this is called learning outcome tracking. And it's a way we show to students about how can they track their own growth across these learning outcomes so they can become a little bit more mindful and targeted of making sure they're showing us a well-rounded growth through the course of the year. PowerSchool. So like I mentioned, we don't use PowerSchool on a daily basis in terms of tracking prep work or assignments. Again, we use it in Canvas. We're giving students feedback. For some of it, it will show up in the citizenship, right, on the regular updates. Other ones will show up on kind of the end of units with the more summative assessment there as they go through. So again, you're going to have to interact with PowerSchool a little bit differently. I also mentioned that, again, we don't, as much as we put grades into PowerSchool, we don't calculate on numbers. Where we look at, again, all the grades that went in summatively, and we then try to take a snapshot of, so where is a student overall? And then we'll kind of put that in. Eventually, we have to put a grade that formally gets entered into PowerSchool, but it's just not an average of, here's all these grades. Like, if they have 6 citizenships and they're all Bs, and then they had 2 unit assessments and they were 3 As, we're not kind of averaging, well, you have 6 Bs and 3 As. We're looking at overall where is a student, where they fall in terms of their engagement and the outcomes. And a lot of this time it will be, again, we'll have student conversations that they know where they fall as well. With PowerSchool, the other thing is you can't just look at the term grade. You actually have to click on the little I, go look at specific assignments, go look at comments. Just because it's not easy just to do a glance. You have to dig in a little bit. And for this, you're just going to look at the evolutions class. So you're not necessarily going to look at evolutions English, evolutions science. We put all of our updates in PowerSchool, with the exception of kind of our big midterm checkpoints, into that evolutions class for you to dig in. So you have one class to go look at. You just have to go past the initial what's the term grade and actually click on the I's and see what assignments are in there, and then are there comments for those assignments. When I was talking about grading, again, what are grades supposed to represent? Well, if they're non-numerical, they kind of go back to, they distill down into this idea of, how are they meeting our learning outcomes overall. And we have about 35 different learning outcomes. And again, they're not averaged together. So it's giving us a more holistic approach of what are we meeting. So for that, I'm going to work kind of bottom up here. So a student would get an F or fail if they're not demonstrating any work. So if they are not submitting work, or the work that they submitted is not related to the learning outcomes, same thing with citizenship. If they were totally disengaged, they would fail evolutions at that point. With this, there'll be lots of reminders and heads up and communications before we get to this point. Growth area means that they're submitting work. It's just at the lower end of expectations in terms of those learning outcomes. And this could be, again, a D to C minus, means that across the board, they're really kind of struggling to engage with a large amount of our learning outcomes as they go through. C to B minus, this is kind of in a partial growth area. This is where they might be, meeting standard on some, maybe their growth area on other, maybe they have some positive negatives in the middle. So that's what gives us kind of the B minus C. If they're meeting standards consistently across a lot of our learning outcomes, then that gets into the A minus B range. So they're doing what they're being asked to do. They're showing proficiency in a lot of different places, which leads us to kind of like, what does exceeding standard means? And this is, again, back to the philosophy of the program, where if they're just doing what they're told really well, then they're not taking full ownership and motivation and independence of their learning. So we award the exceeding standard, the AA plus, for students that can show us that they're going and really taking that sort of responsibility and ownership and independence of their learning. So we know it when we see it, and we award it when we get to that place. Again, this might seem a little bit different from what we're thinking about in traditional classes. Those traditional classes, again, are very teacher-driven. They are quiz, test, paper-driven. They're numerically driven. They're here's the right answer, wrong answer driven, and that's not necessarily how we approach learning. And this is the other part of, we're an honors-based course. So to also have that be honors-based, to truly, again, take that independent ownership, student-driven learning, means that they have to do that. And it's something that we can't just say, well, if you keep doing more of this and keep doing more of that and keep doing more of this, then you'd get to that. Because then we as teachers in the program are setting the standard, versus we need them to fully kind of click into that. You also just might see some other marks of just kind of a check mark or an L or an I, or there'll be comments. So again, there'll be times that we're not actually assessing the work. We're just saying this did get done, this didn't get done, this is incomplete. You need to go back and do more. So that's why you need to kind of click on the I on the course, click on specific assignments, and see what's listed there. Deep breath. I know it's a lot. Other things that kind of factor into our program, and this is part of citizenship, but I just want to clarify because it's a little bit of a difference. So attendance and punctuality. Again, you and your family signed up, students signed up for an experiential program. This means that we start on time and we end on time. A lot of what we do is done here together, and we don't go back. It's harder to be like, go back and just can you catch up on that chapter? Can you get the notes from somebody? If the experience was doing something, if there was an expert that came in that only talked once, if that project team got through that phase of the project design, they're not going to go back because somebody missed. So getting here is really important, and being present. And that way, if we can be present, we can be here, then we can do work as we move forward. So in concert with WHS policies, so typically a student can be absent from a class 11 times before receiving an N, which is no credit. So that's roughly 11 hours of instructional time. Because Evolutions is 4 courses, right, and we don't necessarily break them and line them to blocks, that means a student can miss 44 hours of program time before they receive an N for all 4 courses. And we track this through our attendance. With that, when we think of citizenship, if a student is out 1 to 3 days in the course of a term, right, 1 term of school, that's between 0 and 10 hours. There's no penalty. Again, people get sick, they have to go to appointments. Yes, they're going to miss something. They have to be proactive of checking in, but there's no penalty. Once a student is missing 4 to 9 days or 10 to 34 hours, then it starts to show up on citizenship because they're just not present. They're starting to hinder some of the progress that they can make or hindering progress that their team can make as they go through. As soon as we get they're missing 10 to 15 days of school or 34 to 44 hours, that means they're missing a whole lot in terms of engagement. And so then there's typically a major penalty because we know on those skills, those learning outcomes, they're just not having the time to be introduced, to model, to practice, to get feedback, to make effective progress. And then once we get to that 44 hours, or like if they're missing 16 or more days of school, that's where they're not going to get credit for the course for that term, and then they have to reset. Basically, what you need to know is that being present matters. So the more you can do to help students get here and limit tardies and dismissals, or those days before we go on vacation. Don't be like, oh, it's the Thursday, Friday before vacation. I'm just going to call them out. Let's go on that trip. Like, we do stuff in the program. Students will be missing, they'll be missing instruction. They'll be missing experiences that will kind of may ripple forward. We've had students miss team formation and so they miss that and they come back and then they're not on a team they want to be on. We've had, sometimes we're trying to wrap projects before we go off to vacation. So we kind of like, put that, okay, we can take a deep breath and have vacation really be vacation. We're not have to come back and redo stuff. So the idea of if they're not there to do some of that summative material, that becomes really difficult. So again, being present matters. Being proactive about when students are going to be out is really important. Devices, we use them. So one, we ask them to park their phones, right? We want them to be present here. So on a day-to-day basis, don't expect them to have access to their phone. So if there's an emergency, please call the house office. They will get in contact with us. But most likely their phone is not on their body. It's in a different place in the room that they can't necessarily get to. We do give them breaks to check, but it's not an on-demand sort of thing. We also do use tech within the program. So they need regular and consistent access to computer. If you have a question about that, about how to have it happen, please contact the WHS Tech office to make those arrangements. We just don't want students to feel like they don't have the tools to do the learning on a very consistent basis. Field work, we talked briefly about this, about different expectations earlier on. So we'll go outside the building. We go out in all sorts of weather conditions, whether cold, rainy, with the exception of extreme weather. We let students know ahead of time. So with that, if a student is wearing shorts and it's 20 degrees out, we still might be going, but they might not be able to come. So being, again, aware of supplies, materials, and clothing. Same thing if we're going to be someplace that they're going to miss lunch during the day. We'll let them know to either bring money, bring a lunch, or if they want to be able to get a box lunch from the CAF in the morning, we can prearrange that and they can pick it up before we leave. Transportation, we have a couple different ways we get places. Sometimes we take the big yellow school bus. Sometimes we'll take the white bus that athletics has that can fit 15 students in. Sometimes we'll go and meet at the local MBTA station. So we'll let you know how we're getting there. Again, the big part of this is that students have to follow the WHS guidelines regarding this. And sometimes we'll walk places if it's in town. What the big thing is they can't drive each other and they can't necessarily drive and meet us in Boston, right? So we'll have kind of structured ways that we get from point A to point B that follow those WHS and WPS guidelines, and we expect them to adhere to them. For costs, there'll be times that there are some costs for the trip for us to get from point A to point B. These end up being $10 to $15 per trip. With that, we'll let you know there's an online payment portal. If you have a question about financial concerns, in the packet that also got sent out with this video, there is a form about how to get financial assistance through the district or financial release through the district. It's a complicated form. We heavily suggest if you need that, contact your house office, contact your AP. They will help you go through what needs to be done for that as we go through it. It's different from a free and reduced lunch. It's a separate financial abeyance form. So you have that resources and you know kind of how to get support, but please don't hesitate to reach out for help since we know it's a complicated form. Other supplies, we gave them their first journal. They need to have their journal every day. That's another great question to ask them. Where's your journal? What's in your journal? Do you have your journal? Are you bringing your journal? Always a great question. Um, Art fees, there's a $50 art fee associated with the program that's paid through an online portal. You got that information. When we get to projects, we have a whole process where students can request supplies that they might need for a particular project. So we're asking you guys not to, they shouldn't just go to Amazon and be like, I just need to buy this for my project. We don't want students to be able to kind of buy their way into solutions. We want them to use what we have or know how do they go through the proper channels to request supplies. It's just about getting equity in the program and them not thinking like, oh, I can just go do blank. And when we're in the program, if we have resources and supplies, we need them to take care of them. So if a student damages, breaks, loses a supply, they may be asked to replace it with something that's equitable. This has happened before. So if that happens, we will let the student know. We will let you know what was the item, what was the cost, and how to pay for it or how to replace it. Accountability, again, going back to the beginning of this video, we do exit counseling. So this is our general process. If a student is not meeting our evolution's expectations when it comes to behavior, academics, or kind of community, this is what we end up going through. There's a step zero. Step zero is like a very informal conversation, kind of nudging, gentle reminders of like, this is what we need. If that's not working, we'll have a sit-down initial conversation where the student will sit down with their teacher, a teacher or their advisor, and kind of really lay out like, here's the behaviors, here's what you need to do about it, but also ask them, what's not working about the program for them, or why is it not working, or what does the student need from us to be successful. So it's that kind of like, we're going to mark the moment, but we're also going to hear from them. If the issues continue, then we sit down, the student's advisor sits down with the guidance counselor, and most likely me, the program coordinator, and we start to we review what was said in that initial, why are we still seeing some of these issues, and we start to have a more in-depth conversation of like, is this the right fit, and if this is not the right fit, here's some other options. This is where the guidance counselor comes in. With this, we will also communicate out to you if we're at this stage 2 meeting. If we get to stage 3, so the issues are still happening, this is where we'll bring in the whole EVO team, the student, the guidance counselor, parents, the assistant principal, and have the bigger conversation of like, this isn't working right now, and what really needs to happen to make it work, or is this not working, and what needs to happen to get the student in the place that they can learn best. And then the 4th step is possibly leaving the program. But that's just kind of just so you understand, this is the process we go through because we're trying to, again, engage directly with the student, bring in support and let parents know, bring in everyone to figure out what needs to happen for that student to get in the best learning situation possible. Lastly, how can you get involved? We do send out somewhat regular monthly newsletters with what's happening in the program, what's coming up as we go through. These are through our website, so they might be tagged as a kind of a Wix newsletter. Wix.com is our website. So check your spam box just in case, but they show up there. We also have Instagram page that we follow, so you can look at us there. You can check our website. So just kind of being aware, we have a couple different ways. Very short, we're going to hold an EVO coffee event monthly in the morning where parents can come in and kind of share what their experience is, but kind of like get to know each other a little bit. We'll try to vary that throughout different days of the week, but it will be a morning kind of coffee that we'll set up. On the WHS Makeup Day, we allow students' parents to schedule a teacher conference. So the 3 parties, the student, the parents, and the teacher, will sit down for 15 minutes. Everyone has to agree to be there, which is kind of like an interesting dynamic. But it's just kind of like a midpoint of the year, like how are things going, sort of thing where all parties are there and able to have that voice. You can always email your student's EVO advisor, just to check in of like how are things going. We will send out calls for materials, or we're looking for like, hey, does anybody know about blank? So you might have connections, you might be that connection. Sometimes those will come through the newsletter, sometimes they'll come through the EVO email account. We do events during the year, public presentations, EVO expos, which are typically in late January, early February, and then again in May. And for folks who really want to support the program, we have something that we've had for the last few years called the Evo Catalyst, which is kind of a combination of current and alumni parents that are really see the value of this program at WHS and want to know how they can do more to support the program in advocacy or running events or just generally like want to get really involved with supporting this learning. And so we'll create a kind of a list, an email list of those parents, and you're free to say, I want to be involved more, and we'll let you know how you can do that. So at this point, we kind of had some Q&A in the night event, going back and forth. We don't necessarily have a version of that here, but if you do have questions that didn't necessarily come up or were addressed in this video, please feel free to let us know, and we'll try to address those questions as succinctly and quickly as possible. All right, thank you for watching. I know it was a lot to kind of take in, but we're a program, we're not a class, and there's a lot of components we have, so we just want to make sure that you have a sense of understanding of what we do here and why we do it and some of how we do it, because we're all here to support these students in their learning journey for this year. So thank you for watching.